I am staring at a government memo that shouldn't exist, a secret document that two whistleblowers just risked everything to get into the hands of Congress and the press. And what I'm reading right now, I believe, represents one of the most dangerous constitutional violations of the Trump administration so far. I know that sounds extreme. Maybe I am overreacting, but I don't think I am. This memo says that ICE agents can now break down your door with nothing more than a piece of paper signed by a Trump-appointed immigration judge. No federal judge, no independent oversight, no Fourth Amendment protections. Just a Trump official authorizing another Trump official to burst into American homes and drag people out. And against that backdrop, we've got new reporting that they used a 5-year-old child as bait. Armed, masked ICE agents grabbed a kindergartner, pushed him up to his own front door, and tried to get him to knock so they could arrest more of his family. Then they sent that 5-year-old and his father to a detention center in Texas surrounded by barbed wire. How did we get here? That is what I keep asking myself. How did we go from America as the land of the free to this? I spent the last 2 days reading through 1,200 comments on this story. What I found terrified me, surprised me, and honestly gave me a small sliver of hope. But first, you need to understand exactly what this memo says and why it violates everything the Supreme Court has said about the Fourth Amendment for the last 45 years. Let me walk you through this step by step because the legal implications are staggering. There are 2 types of arrest warrants in immigration law. I know legal stuff can get boring fast, but stay with me because this matters for your rights. There's something called an I-205 administrative warrant. That's issued by an immigration judge who, despite the title judge, actually works for Donald Trump. They work for the executive branch, for the Department of Justice, ultimately for the president. Then there's a real warrant issued by an actual federal magistrate or judge who sits in the judicial branch. Someone who is independent, who is neutral, who can tell the government no. Now, historically, those administrative warrants, the I-205 forms, they could only be used in public places. You are on the street, you are at a courthouse, you are in front of your house. They can execute that administrative warrant. But if they want to come inside your home, if they want to break the plane of your threshold, enter what the law calls the curtilage, your castle, they need a real warrant from a real federal judge. Why? Because of a Supreme Court case from 1980 called United States versus Payton. The Supreme Court said very clearly that your home has special constitutional protection under the Fourth Amendment. The government cannot just burst into your home without independent judicial oversight. That's been the law of the land for 45 years, until May 2025. That's when a Department of Homeland Security lawyer wrote a memo that says, and I'm going to read this to you directly, although the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has not historically relied on administrative warrants to arrest aliens subject to final orders in their place of residence, the DHS Office of General Counsel has recently determined that the U.S. Constitution, the Immigration and Nationality Act, and the immigration regulations do not prohibit the use for this purpose. Think about what that is saying. A Trump administration lawyer is claiming that they can reinterpret the Constitution to allow warrants signed by Trump officials to be used to break into homes, even though the Supreme Court has said for decades that you need independent judicial oversight for that. The memo goes on. It says ICE agents can conduct an administrative arrest with a knock and announce. They can enter the residence with just that administrative warrant. And once inside, they may conduct a limited search of the immediate area. So you can knock down your door with a Trump judge's piece of paper in your back pocket, take out whoever's there, and search your home while they re-at it. That is what this memo authorizes. Now, about 40% of the comments I read said some version of, "This is exactly what we expected from Trump. No surprise here." Another 30% were furious, using words I can to repeat on this platform. But here is what caught my attention. About 15% of the comments came from people who said, look, if someone is here illegally with a final order of removal, why shouldn't ICE be able to arrest them? And that is actually a fair question. It deserves a serious answer. So let me engage with that perspective because I think it gets to the heart of why this matters, even if you support strict immigration enforcement. The Fourth Amendment doesn't just protect citizens, it protects everyone in America from unreasonable searches and seizures. The framers of the Constitution understood something crucial. If you give the government the power to break into homes without independent oversight, that power will be abused. Maybe not today, maybe not against you, but eventually it will be. History shows us this over and over. When you let the executive branch be the judge, jury, and executor of its own warrants, when you remove that independent check, you are not just changing immigration policy. You are fundamentally altering the balance of power that protects all of us. Here's the thing that people who support this policy need to reckon with. Today, it's immigration judges signing warrants to enter homes of undocumented immigrants. What happens when a future administration you don't trust decides to use this precedent for something else? What happens when they say, well, we already established that administrative warrants are sufficient to enter homes, so now we can use them for other purposes? The Fourth Amendment isn't just a nice idea. It's the barrier between you and government agents breaking down your door whenever they feel like it. And the Supreme Court has consistently said, for good reason, that this amendment is one of the most important protections we have. Some justices argue it's the most important amendment in the Bill of Rights. So when the Trump administration issues a memo that directly contradicts Supreme Court precedent, that should alarm everyone regardless of where you stand on immigration. And here's where it gets even more disturbing. This isn't just theoretical anymore. We are seeing the results of this policy in real time. In Minnesota, in the Columbia Heights School District, ICE agents arrested a 5-year-old boy named Liam Cujo Ramos. Let me tell you exactly what happened because the details matter. Liam was coming home from school with his father. They pulled into the driveway. Waiting for them was a gang of masked, armed ICE agents. The father panicked. I mean, put yourself in that situation. You pull up to your house with your kindergartner in the car, and there are masked, armed agents waiting for you. What would you do? The father took off, and these agents grabbed Liam, a 5-year-old child. They pushed him up to his own front door. They tried to get him to knock, to bang on the door, to get his family members inside to come out so they could arrest them too. There was nobody inside who they were looking for. The family begged the agents to let Liam stay with them. No, they sent that 5-year-old and his father to San Antonio, Texas, to a detention center, in a cage. Let that image sit with you for a moment. A 5-year-old American child, because Liam was born here, used as bait by federal agents, then sent across the country to a facility with barbed wire and cages. I have to tell you, when I first read about this, I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe the reporting was exaggerated, but multiple sources have confirmed it. The Washington Post has it, the Associated Press has it, members of Congress have seen the evidence, and Liam isn't the only child. There are reports of 10-year-olds being arrested, 17-year-olds coming back from school grabbed by ICE agents. This is happening in American communities right now. One commenter wrote something that really stuck with me. They said, "This reminds me of Anne Frank's diary." She wrote, "Terrible things are happening outside. At any time of night and day, poor, helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. Families are torn apart. Men, women, and children are separated." I don't make Holocaust comparisons lightly. I think they were usually inappropriate and offensive. But when you read talking about armed agents breaking into homes, separating families, using children as tools of enforcement, those historical echoes start to feel uncomfortably relevant. Now, I know some of you are thinking, come on, that is way over the top. These are immigration enforcement actions, not genocide. And you rewrite, the scale and intent are completely different. But the mechanisms of authoritarian control, the way governments normalize the previously unthinkable, that follows patterns we've seen before. A German professor who lived through the Nazi rise to power wrote this: "Each act, each occasion is worse than the last, but only a little worse. You wait for the next and the next. You wait for one great shocking occasion, thinking that others, when such a shock comes, will join with you in resisting somehow." That quote showed up in several comments, and it gave me chills. Because I think that exactly what is happening. We are being conditioned to accept each new violation as not that much worse than the last one. First, it is immigration raids in public places. Then it is raids near schools. Then it is raids in homes without proper warrants. Then it is using children as bait. Where does it end? At what point do we say, no, this crosses a line we cannot accept? And remember, this is all happening under the authority of this secret memo that 2 brave whistleblowers just exposed. These are government insiders who are still working in the system, who saw what was happening and said, this is wrong. This needs to see the light of day. Thank God for whistleblowers. Seriously, without them, we wouldn't know about this memo. The Trump administration would be executing this policy in the shadows, and we'd only find out through the stories of families being torn apart. Now, here's what I predict is going to happen next, and this is falsifiable. If I'm wrong about this, come back and tell me I screwed up. There's going to be a lawsuit, probably multiple lawsuits. The American Civil Liberties Union, Democracy Forward, some major public interest law firm is going to challenge this memo as unconstitutional under the Fourth Amendment. They are going to argue that it violates Supreme Court precedent going back to U.S. versus Payton in 1980. And here is the thing. I think they are going to win at the district court level, maybe at the appeals court level too, because this memo is such a clear violation of established Fourth Amendment law that federal judges are going to have a hard time upholding it, but then it's going to go to the Supreme Court. And that's where I get nervous, because we've seen this Supreme Court willing to overturn decades of precedent. We saw it with Roe versus Wade. We've seen it with affirmative action. We've seen it with environmental regulations and voting rights. Will they overturn 45 years of Fourth Amendment protections to give Trump the power to raid homes without independent judicial oversight? I don't know. I hope not. The Fourth Amendment has traditionally been one area where conservative and liberal justices actually agree. There's a strong libertarian streak among conservatives about protecting the home from government intrusion. But I'm not confident, and that terrifies me. Speaking of courts, there's another piece of this story that's even more brazen. The chief immigration judge, a woman named Teresa Riley, who works for the Trump administration, just issued a memo to all the other immigration judges. And this memo told them to ignore federal court orders. Let me say that again. The head of the immigration court system told her judges to disregard orders from actual federal judges about bond hearings and due process. A federal judge in Massachusetts named Judge Saris saw this memo and said she was very troubled that an administrative law judge is telling colleagues to ignore federal court orders. The ACLU ran back into court to file an emergency motion about this. What we're witnessing is a direct challenge to the authority of the federal judiciary. The executive branch, through these immigration judges who work for Trump, is saying we don't have to follow what federal judges tell us to do. This is a constitutional crisis. I don't use that term lightly. But when one branch of government openly defies another branch, when the executive branch claims it can ignore the courts, that's the definition of a constitutional crisis. And Chief Justice John Roberts, who presides over the entire federal judiciary, needs to wake up to what is happening, because if he thinks his branch isn't under attack just because he sits on high as a Supreme Court justice, he's wrong. The Trump administration is systematically undermining the authority of federal courts, and it is happening right now in immigration cases. Today, it is immigration judges ignoring federal court orders. Tomorrow, it could be other executive branch agencies doing the same thing. If this precedent stands, if the administration can just tell its employees to disregard federal judges, then what's the point of having an independent judiciary at all? I want to go back to those comments for a minute because there was a perspective that showed up that I found really compelling. Several people who identified as Trump supporters said something like, look, I voted for Trump because I wanted stricter border security, but this isn't what I signed up for. Using 5-year-olds as bait, ignoring the Constitution, that is not making America great. That is making America unrecognizable, one person wrote. I believe Trump when he said he'd go after dangerous criminals. But they are arresting kids coming home from school. They were breaking into homes without proper warrants. This isn't a law and order. This is lawlessness. That comment got me thinking, because I believe, and maybe I'm naive here, but I believe that most Americans, regardless of their politics, actually want to live in a country where federal agents can burst into homes without independent judicial oversight. Most Americans want children used as tools of law enforcement. There's common ground there. The question is whether we can find it before this gets even worse. Because here's what I am seeing, and this is the part that keeps me up at night. The Trump administration is testing how far they can push. They re-seeing what they can get away with, and every time they cross a line and nothing happens, no consequences, no accountability, they move the line further. First it was the Muslim ban, then it was family separation at the border. Then it was sending federal agents to Portland to grab protesters off the streets. Now it's raiding homes with administrative warrants and using children as bait. What's next? Seriously, what is the next thing that we are going to read about and think, well, it is horrible, but it is not that much worse than what they did last month? I refuse to accept that this is inevitable. I refuse to believe that we are just going to slide into full authoritarianism without a fight. But I also recognize that outrage alone doesn't stop this. Social media posts don't stop this. We need legal action. We need political action. We need people in positions of power willing to stand up and say no. And some people are doing exactly that. Those two whistleblowers who leaked this memo, they are heroes in my book. They saw something unconstitutional happening inside the government and they exposed it, knowing it could cost them their careers, maybe worse. Judge Saris in Massachusetts calling out the immigration court system for telling judges to ignore federal court orders. That takes courage. The ACLU and other civil rights organizations filing emergency motions that the legal resistance we need, but it's not enough. We need more. We need members of Congress to actually do something beyond performative outrage on Twitter. We need federal judges to issue injunctions and contempt citations when the administration defies their orders. We need state and local officials to refuse to cooperate with ICE when they're reoperating under these unconstitutional policies. And we need regular citizens to pay attention, to care, to take action. Here's what you can do right now. First, if you live in Minnesota or anywhere this is happening, document everything. If you see ICE raids, record them safely from a distance. Get the badge numbers if you can. Report what you see to the ACLU, to local immigrant rights organizations, to the press. Second, call your representatives in Congress. I know everyone's tired of calling. I know it feels futile. But congressional offices track these calls, and when they get flooded with calls about a specific issue, it moves up the priority list. Tell them you want hearings on this memo. You want investigations into the use of children in immigration enforcement. You want accountability. Third, support the organizations doing this work. The ACLU, the National Immigration Law Center, Democracy Forward, these groups are going to be filing the lawsuits that challenge this memo. They need resources to fight this battle in court. Fourth, show up for the Columbia Heights School District in Minnesota. They are dealing with the trauma of having their students and families targeted. Show solidarity however you can. Donations, messages of support, amplifying their voices. And fifth, don't look away. I know it's exhausting. I know you are tired of being outraged all the time. I am too. But the moment we normalize this, the moment we stop being shocked by children in cages and unconstitutional home raids that when we lost, I want to end with something that gives me a complicated mix of hope and fear. In those 1,200 comments I read, I saw people from across the political spectrum expressing genuine alarm about this. Not everyone, obviously. There were plenty of comments celebrating the crackdown, but there were also self-identified conservatives saying, this has gone too far. That tells me there's still a chance to build a coalition against this. Not a left-right coalition, but a pro-Constitution coalition. People who believe that no president, regardless of party, should have the power to raid homes without independent judicial oversight. People who believe that children should never be used as tools of law enforcement. If we can find that common ground, if we can make this about constitutional principles rather than tribal politics, maybe we can stop this before it gets worse. But I'm also afraid, because I've seen how quickly those moments of potential unity dissolve into partisan warfare. I've seen how effectively the Trump administration uses fear and tribalism to justify the unjustifiable. So I am holding both of those things at once. Hope that enough Americans will say no to this. Fear that we want to act in time. What I know for certain is that I am not going to stay silent. I am going to keep covering this story. I am going to keep reading your comments and learning from your perspectives. I am going to keep calling this out for what it is, a systematic assault on constitutional protections that should alarm everyone. And I am asking you to do the same. Don't let this become normalized. Don't let outrage fatigue make you numb to what's happening. This memo, these policies, the use of that 5-year-old child, this is not normal. This is not acceptable. This is not what America is supposed to be. Maybe I am wrong about how serious this is. Maybe there are legal complexities I am missing. Maybe the courts will strike this down and it'll never be used again. I genuinely hope I am overreacting. But based on everything I am seeing, based on the pattern of this administration pushing boundaries and testing limits, based on the willingness to use children as tools and to ignore federal court orders, I believe we are watching the construction of an authoritarian infrastructure that could be used for purposes far beyond immigration enforcement. Today, it's undocumented immigrants. Tomorrow, it could be political protesters. The day after that, it could be anyone the administration deems undesirable. The mechanisms of authoritarian control Don T announce themselves with dramatic speeches. They get built incrementally through bureaucratic memos and policy changes, through the slow erosion of constitutional protections, through the normalization of the previously unthinkable. That S, what this memo represents. That S, why it matters. That S, why we have to fight it. Thank you to those two whistleblowers who risked everything to get this information out. Thank you to the journalists covering this story. Thank you to the civil rights organizations preparing to fight this in court. Thank you to everyone who refuses to accept this as the new normal. And to that 5-year-old boy, Liam, I'm so sorry this happened to you. You deserved better. You deserve an America that protects children instead of using them as bait. We all do. This fight is far from over. In fact, I think it's just beginning. Stay informed, stay engaged, stay outraged, and most importantly, stay committed to the idea that constitutional protections matter, that courts matter, that no one is above the law. I'll keep following this story right here. Every development, every lawsuit, every time they push the line further, because someone has to keep track. Someone has to keep saying this is wrong,